While the games of the 1980s helped to lay the foundation for games to come, the games of the 1990s would keep the ball rolling by taking advantage of new technologies. That decade saw the release of the PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, and the Dreamcast, and with it, video games would begin to explore realms and possibilities that couldn't be possible with earlier systems. These systems allowed us to immerse ourselves more than ever before, and with the advent of pre-rendered graphics, three-dimensional visuals, voice acting, and CG cutscenes, they all helped to give us more of an emotional attachment to the stories being told. Taking full advantage of the new technology was Capcom, and in 1996 they created essentially a new genre, and in doing so create games one of the most popular franchises. We take a look at Resident Evil and talk about how this series has kept us searching for that next green herb these past 15 years right here on Downloadable Content. Hello everyone, greetings, salutations. Welcome to this fun episode of Downloadable Content. I'm Brian, and we are joined by a different three. Wyatt.
Hello.
Chris. And I hear crickets. And Ronald.
I hear crickets. Nice to meet you.
I'm here.
Like, I'm here!
I had to unmute my mic again.
I guess I'm kind of the new guy on the block, so this will be fun.
Yes, your first episode. You're no longer a virgin.
Yeah, well, I've been saying I'd be coming on here for a while now.
Now you're going to deliver.
I say Resident Evil finally got me out of my little shell.
It'll get anyone out of its shell, quite frankly.
Well, because you're running away screaming from something.
Indeed.
So, as I said in the intro, 15 years ago, the first Resident Evil game came into existence.
It's hard to believe it's been 15 years already.
15 years! I'm like, what? Huh? Really?
I still remember going out there and picking it up in the game store, just waiting in line for it the first day it came out.
I wouldn't be introduced to the series until Resident Evil 2, but I will get there in due course. So, let's dive right in. We're going to start off with Resident Evil 1, obviously. It was made for the PS1 and released in 1996. The inspiration for Resident Evil was from another Capcom game called Sweet Home,
which was creepy as hell.
In fact, Resident Evil 1 was supposed to be a sequel to Sweet Home.
A 3D version of it, basically.
And it ended up becoming its own separate entity. Released in Japan under the name Biohazard. I finally got the answer to this question a few days ago. Why the naming difference? And it was simply because that they felt that it was going to be very hard to trademark the name Biohazard in the U.S.
That makes plenty of sense, actually.
I don't think they would have managed to fight for that trademark.
Yeah. But, given that the PlayStation 1 was still very new at the time, having been released PlayStation being released in the US in 95, which again seems like not that long ago. It was definitely, when I played Resident Evil 1, I definitely got the B-movie feel out of it. Considering that I started with Resident Evil 2, and so going back to the first game, I was actually shocked to find that this game did well enough to warrant a sequel, given the game's more notable,
origins,
most notable moments, like
Jill Sandwich,
and Master of Unlocking, and
who does not remember those lines? I mean, they're terrible lines, but at this point, for any fans of the series, they're classic lines. They make you laugh every time you hear them.
To the point where Capcom is now parodying itself.
Mm-hmm.
That happens with just about any series that goes on long enough where they kind of make fun of some of their earlier works.
I think in Resident Evil 5, actually, one of the trophies for the PS3 version is called Master of Unlocking. So,
Same for Xbox.
So, it started, visually it actually looked very good. It used pre-rendered backgrounds, trying to use, the full graphical capabilities of the PS1. It was definitely known for its shock value.
Well, I mean, with its graphics, I mean, the only thing out there that when I first saw that and Final Fantasy VII were the two things that made me realize the PlayStation isn't like the Super Nintendo. It's not like the N64. It's different. It's going to show us stuff that we haven't seen before.
And it's certainly proved that.
Oh yeah.
And just the setting of the game and the soundtrack for the game definitely evoked this sort of creepy element that, you didn't know what was going to happen behind that door.
Mm-hmm.
It was certainly interesting. And, the story itself was very interesting as well. The story, being unfolded through documents that you find, cutscenes. Gaming was now experimenting with new ways of storytelling.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, the documents is something that worked really well for Resident Evil. I love that concept. And even now, it just seems like 10, 15 years later, RPGs are finally starting to catch on to that bandwagon, like Final Fantasy 13 with the little sections where you can read additional parts of the story if you care to.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I think that works really well. I'm surprised more games didn't pick up on that concept after Resident Evil.
I don't know why that particular plot device took so long for other series to get a hold of, but it certainly worked, given the atmosphere and setting of the game.
That's entirely true.
Even little things that further gave the game character. Finding ink ribbons for saves.
And the limited number of saves, especially for, a survival horror game like this, where you want to save as much as you can, limiting that number. And not even like a save every so often, just you have a certain number of ink ribbons. Do you want to use it now before you go into the new area? Or do you want to hold on to that in case you need it later?
There was definitely a strategy element for sure. There was just a whole lot of interesting new things about this. Even your choice of character. To start the game, you have the option of choosing either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine to start the game, and each character has their own advantages and disadvantages. Jill, for example, has the lockpick, so she can pick, locked doors and go into places of the mansion that Chris needs to find small keys for.
She also started with the gun.
Right, and Chris has the consequence. I mean, Jill has the consequence of being physically weaker than Chris, so she can't take as much damage. Whereas Chris has a smaller item inventory, but can take and deal more damage.
That smaller item inventory really hurt you in that game.
Especially since you had to really conserve your ammo. Ammo was hard to find. It wasn't like Resident Evil 4 where enemies are just dropping it.
And here's the worst part about it. You have less space than Jill does, but the addendum to that is Jill's lockpick also means you don't have to carry around the keys that Chris needs to occasionally. So he, in essence, actually has less space than he seems.
Regardless, it made for yep.
But yeah, no, the having the two different characters, that really was... I hadn't seen any other game like that at the time. Though it didn't really come into its own until Resident Evil 2, when you could have the dual stories going on, where...
Right, that's exactly it. Although interesting things about Resident Evil 1, the US and the US version was censored. The US version was censored. Apparently in the Japanese version you had in the intro, there were shots of mangled corpses that had to be removed. And also, all scenes involving Chris Redfield smoking were removed for the American audience.
Huh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Until the DualShock Director's Cut.
Yep.
Right. The Director's Cut came along, and it didn't really alter the gameplay, it didn't alter the story, but they rearranged the enemy placement and the item placement in the Director's Cut. Director's Cut came out a year later. And then, of course, it would be remade for the GameCube.
I consider that a reboot more than a remake.
Yeah, I could see it going either way. I consider it more of a remake because, again, most of the plot is left untouched. A few things have been retconned, but the game
it kind of straddles the line between a remake and a reboot. But either way, it definitely brought some new eyes back to the franchise, to the earlier parts of it at least.
Right.
Regardless, this new, and then this was introduced in the first game, puzzle solving was a key element of the game. This was something that would continue for the first few entries of the series.
I miss puzzle solving.
It was certainly interesting. I mean, it meant a lot of backtracking and a lot of finding of pieces of items and things like that, but, it helped. I think it definitely added to the overall atmosphere of the game. The first game itself was very positively reviewed and was a big commercial success. Up until this point, we had very, very few games like it. And, for all of its little flaws, it still ended up, being very successful enough to get a remake. Not a remake, a sequel. Resident Evil 2 was released in 1998. That was my introduction to the series when I saw somebody playing it, and it wasn't the zombie killing that appealed to me. It was the story. I was watching somebody play it, and reading the documents that my friend was finding really drew me into the game, and I went, I have to play this.
I'll say, amongst all the series, and not taking anything away from any of them, but I think RE2 had the strongest story of all of them, and it really just draws you in. I mean...
Well, go on, elaborate.
Okay, I will go on.
Go on!
First of all, the captain, the police chief. That guy had to be... It was one of the first human faces we could put to the evil in the series. I mean, as you think about it, we have all of these creatures, and occasionally we had Wesker in the first game, but we don't really realize he's evil until towards the end of the game, especially in the original game before the director's cut, because if I remember correctly, one of his scenes was cut out entirely in the original one. It kind of felt like it came out of left field when I played the director's cut and saw, Wesker's... when that scene came up, and I went, it's not as much out of left field if that scene had been left in there. But, the police chief just really was the first time we actually had a human villain in the series that we could see early.
Yes, the police chief Brian Irons, and you start finding out just how deep this whole thing involving Umbrella goes. And, Resident Evil 2 was the introduction of my favorite character in the entire series, Leon Kennedy. Just because of the way it's set up. Leon is heading into Raccoon City his first day on the job, and oh fuck.
I kind of had the same experience for why I like my favorite character, but I'm all for Rebecca Chambers from the first game, which I'm one of the few and far between who actually likes her as a character.
Yes, you are. To me, she's a whiny prat.
Now, Leon, I never played the second one, but the great thing about Leon is just throughout the entire series and the entire universe, you just get the feeling of, oh, you poor bastard.
Yeah.
And that's why I love him. He feels like a regular dude, or is very kind of, I want my own business, and he gets drawn into this whole thing. That's one of the things I appreciate the most about him, playing as him in Resident Evil 4, and what I know of Resident Evil 2.
It was certainly, Resident Evil 2, as Ron hit on earlier, it was the first in the series to actually have the intertwining storyline between Leon and Claire, and also to get the full story of Resident Evil 2, it was the first game where you had to play through multiple times. You had to play Leon's A and B scenario and Claire's A and B scenario to really get the full scope of what was going on. It's kept pretty much the same basic gameplay elements as the first game, but they definitely cleaned up a bit on the voice acting.
There's no live action in the second one.
Nope, not a bit. Not a bit. It was, any major cutscenes were CG'd.
Do you remember Leon walking into the police station and seeing the puddle of blood on the floor?
Oh!
And looking up to see the liquor?
Oh!
And it just flies down.
And I'm just like, oh, hell.
Amazing scene right there.
Oh, this isn't good.
Memorable scenes from that game. That and when you're in the... you have the two-way mirror and you can hear it behind the mirror and you walk to the end of the room and then you go to leave and it bursts through the two-way mirror and scares the crap out of my 12-year-old self.
You want to know who else was great for doing that in the second one? The Tyrant.
Yeah.
Mr. X.
Yeah, but we never knew what his name was, so we called him the Neo-Tyrant, because we knew he was a tyrant.
Yes. You knew that. It was kind of the precursor to Nemesis.
Stars.
Yeah, Nemesis was another one that did the exact same thing, but he took it one more thing and followed you through screens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm just gonna run away from this thing and go through this door. None of the other zombies can find me. Oh crap, why is he...
Oh, why did he just burst through the door?
Yeah, exactly.
Why does he have a rocket launcher?
Why it's taking us a while to get to the actual, scary parts. But if we're gonna talk about scare, we should talk about, the first one, which was the damn dog coming through the window in the first one. Sorry for the spoiler, but that was my first introduction to the series. I wasn't allowed to play. It was too violent, it was too gory. But my neighbor next door had an older brother who was playing it. I remember seeing enough of that gave me nightmares. I'm not a big fan of zombies, besides Resident Evil. And seeing the dogs burst through that door and these great moments of just horror, and those split moments where you know that there's going to be something coming, but you don't know where it's going to come from, and then it just manages to catch you.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the first one when you'd be like, I don't want to be in the mansion, I want to walk out through the door, and you go to open the door and the dogs come rushing in.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're like, ah!
Even when you get to the GameCube remake, one of the greatest things, they remade, I think, either somewhere between 15 and 75% of the actual mansion itself in that. But what happens is that when you go through that first hallway where the dog is, and you're waiting for the dog to burst through the window, because you remember in the first game, if you ever played it, that was when I was 10.
Yeah, you know what's coming. You're like, all right, come on.
You know it's coming. You're freaking out. You're like, okay, I know it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen at any moment, but it's still going to scare the crap out of me. You're waiting for it, and it doesn't happen. And you get all the way to the end of the hallway, and all of a sudden the window caves inward, but nothing comes through. That's what I loved about the remake.
That's Capcom going, fool you!
Yeah. That's one thing that I will appreciate about the series, that even throughout its entirety, even though it's a large series and people make fun of things that get too big in terms of sequels, it still manages to grab you by the seat of your pants every so often, and I love it for that reason.
Resident Evil 2 was more of a success than its first. Of the series, it's the best-selling game of the series on a single platform.
On one thing from what we were just saying before we continue on, the dogs bursting through the door. Funny little thing, I never actually knew about that scene until about 4 years after I got the game. I never tried to leave the mansion through the front door. Years later, one of my friends was telling me about it, and I'm like, no, that doesn't happen. I would have known about that. I've had the game for years. Little did I know.
Ha ha.
The only way I knew about it was because when you first walk in and Wesker's like, Jill's like, Barry, where's Barry? And Wesker goes, I'm sorry, but he's probably... And then you hear the gunshot. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, maybe he's still outside. And I turned around to walk out the door, and then I had dogs.
And yeah. And then, Resident Evil has always been known, especially in these early installments, for their shock value. I mean, Resident Evil 2, you'll be walking through the police station, la-di-da-di-da, and then suddenly crows shoot through the glass, and I'm like, oh, and first after you've already thrown the controller in panic, you're like, oh shit, I gotta get away from these, and it was just my biggest. I mean, again, what drew me into the series was the story. The documents, the cutscenes. I wanted to know why this was the cause of that. And I wouldn't be able to fully beat it until my stepbrother got a memory card, because he wanted to go through Resident Evil 2 without saving, because he was just as fascinated by the game as I was, but he didn't have a memory card. So he had made it pretty far in Resident Evil 2 until he hit the alligator. Until he hit the alligator and didn't know what you had to do to defeat it. So, that ended that. But it certainly introduced a deeper layer of story and would introduce characters like, again, Leon, Claire in future games. Ada would be in future games.
The whole Birkin lineage.
Ah, yes, and also William Birkin.
Yeah, the second game, I think, really brought a lot of the elements in. I mean, the first game is what brought us all into the series, but I think the second game is what built the foundations that the rest of the games came off of. It introduced a lot of the recurring characters, a lot of the recurring themes. It definitely, not that the first game didn't have a good story, but it definitely gave us more information on Umbrella and what they're doing and what they're trying to do. It kind of just built on everything that everything else later on would come and take.
Yes, and, it would continue to establish elements that would continue going, pretty much through until Resident Evil 4, where then, the series got flipped on its head. But
before we get there, I mean, just for context, the time period of Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, and Resident Evil 3 is really interesting, just because of the time period of what game making was doing back then. I haven't looked this up in a while, so forgive me if I mess this up, but this is around the time, you have Final Fantasy VII, you have the first CGI in video games, you have the first 3D in video games, and so there were so many new ideas out there, and so many were being bandied about. So many people were trying to figure out what they were going to do with them. And Resident Evil, the first one, was one of those pioneering games. They're like, hey, look, we can do horror. We can make this work. We can make this really, really good. And they made a lot of mistakes in the process. The really cheesy live action opening, which was in retrospect, now that I'm not 10, is hilarious. And then Resident Evil 2 just took that and built it all together, and they're the ones that built survival horror. That really needs to be said before we get to Resident Evil 4 and all of that, is just how great these opening series were.
Yeah, and the shift in genre that the later ones have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and before we head to 3, Resident Evil 2 was the first in the series to introduce mini games.
Yeah.
So you had the fourth survivor, Hunk, and also Tofu, which...
The Tofu Survivor was the funnest game.
It was also extremely silly, going after zombies as nothing more than a block of bean curd wielding a knife, but
One other thing before we move on to the third one, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the designs of the enemies, because when you got beyond just the zombies, into the hunters, into the lickers, the tyrants, they were just... You didn't see those types of things in zombie movies. They obviously didn't come from the inspirations behind Resident Evil. These are just things they threw at us and we'd never seen.
Exactly. That's definitely a good point. I mean, these creatures, these enemies were really, really sort of fear-inducing things. Not to mention the sheer difficulty of...
Actually, I'll be straight up honest. The reason why I did not play Resident Evil 2 was this is when I was starting to get a I think I started to get a PS2, and so I was able to play Resident Evil 3. But it took me a while to even play Resident Evil 3 because all I saw in reviews and stuff like that were pictures of the lickers and what they would do to people, and I was like, no, I'm not playing that game. Nope, sorry, just not gonna do it. Just don't feel like putting myself through that. And shame that I missed it for that reason. But when you're 12 or 13 as a sheltered kid or somewhat sheltered kid, it's you stay away from something like that.
Well, I'm happy to say that the original Resident Evil 1 and the director's cut, they are available on the PlayStation Network for download, as well as Resident Evil 2 and 3. They are available on the PlayStation Network, and also these games have been remade several times for GameCube. I think the Wii got hit with a couple of these ports. But yes, I mean, the Tyrant is just one of the, especially Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, it was just this relentless,
And then when you get to Nemesis with his tentacles coming after you.
Yes, it's part hentai. No.
But no, the Tyrants were just... I mean, they were the monsters. In the first game, when you're running around trying to take it down and it's chasing after you, it's gouging holes in the pavement. I mean, I had such an adrenaline rush playing through that section.
Yeah, and also, by the way, you have a time limit.
Oh, yes.
Because every Resident Evil game has a self-destruct mechanism. And it's always during the final boss. It's somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes. And then you have to kill this thing and complete the rest of the game. Otherwise, you get the infamous "you died" screen.
And it sucks so bad in Resident Evil 2 when you beat the boss and you don't manage to get out in time because you have to continue after you kill them.
Right, the game doesn't just go right into CG ending. You still have more game to play, and the clock is ticking. So...
I was always worried in RE2 when I was doing that after you beat the boss, what if there's a note or something you can get somewhere, and I don't know where it is, and I have to get out of there. So I actually started just combing through every time I beat the game, different rooms, trying to find any little...
So you started second-guessing yourself.
Yes, exactly.
You started second... That's wow. I've never heard that. I mean, I just went like, fuck it. I have 2 minutes on the clock. I'm going. Get the hell out of here. But it was also, for me, one of the very first games in my memory where the final boss had more than one form. So you're like, final boss, and shotgun blast. Bless you. Final boss.
Who knew William Birkin was a Pokemon? He could evolve.
Yeah, because you'd already faced him a couple of times previously in the game, and now he transforms, and okay, you shoot him up, and then the clock's going, and you're like, and then it switches into cutscene, and you're like, oh, good, I still have 4 minutes to go, life's good, and he changes again, I'm like, oh great, all right. Oh, now you can hop. Okay.
He's like a giant puppy dog.
Suddenly, then you shoot him, and then CG it again. Cutscene again, and it changes again into this giant ball of spikes with an orifice in the middle of it.
Get it right. It's a giant ball of sadness.
No. It's a giant ball of infected, mutated, blah, blah, with spikes in it, and then you're like, and now you're being like, oh come on, 1 minute is on the fucking clock, and I need to get out of here, but that's it. There was panic, and it was great. It was great, and it would continue on to Resident Evil 3, which was released in 1999. Resident Evil 3 has a little bit of a skewed continuity, because the first half of the game takes place before 2.
And then the second half of the game... Well, not even the first half. The first third of the game takes place before 2, and then...
And then it picks up...
About the same time as 2.
It continues the storyline. It is the only game of the series to offer you a choice in certain cutscenes.
Well, that's kind of to make up for the fact that you can only choose one character.
That is true. I mean, in Resident Evil 1 and 2, you could choose which character you started off with. Resident Evil 3, it is Jill and only Jill. But again, there were certain points in Resident Evil 3 where you were offered a choice. The very first one in the game is your introduction to Nemesis after he, plants a tentacle through Brad.
Poor Brad. He was also in every game up till 3.
Yes.
He was.
He's the only character.
Yes, and first choice. Okay, Nemesis, you just got introduced to Nemesis. He just rammed a tentacle through the face of one of your former partners. And okay, here's your choice: try to fight him or run into the police station.
I'd had that part of the game spoiled for me because when I bought it, I got the strategy guide and I knew you wanted to get the item on the on the body. So I kept trying to fight Nemesis, and I died like 10 times in a row.
Well, just as an aside, you didn't have to get the item off of Brad's body.
Oh, I did. I realize that now.
You didn't have to do it. It just meant that your gameplay would be extended by about 15 minutes. But be that as it may, also, you couldn't take too long making your decision. Because if you took too long, the game would decide for you, and it was never pretty, usually ending up in a you died.
That first one was...
That happened to me the first time, yep.
I'd say that first one, I think, was the only one that didn't end in a you died. It had him hit you. Every other time was a you died, I think.
It was...
To me, it felt a lot like Dragon Lair. The choice.
Oh, okay.
That's a good point.
Because one was always the good way, and one was always you died.
Well, in Resident Evil 3, if you made your choice in a certain amount of time, it wasn't necessarily an automatic you died. It was just either the easy way out or the hard way out.
And the hard way normally resulted in...
Eventually it would lead to a you died, yes.
You died.
But there was almost always a plus side to choosing the harder method, though.
Yes, there was a little bit of a nugget if you tried to go for the harder ones. But my first time playing through, I just no. No. First choice, Nemesis. Go run into the police station or fight him. And I'm thinking, okay, all Jill has is a handgun and a knife, and there's a tyrant that's about to kill me. I'm running.
And unlike Mr. X, Nemesis was pretty crazy from the first moment you saw him. He wasn't slowly walking towards you.
He had speed.
And he had a rocket launcher.
Oh, yes.
Let's not forget the rocket launcher.
He had the rocket launcher and a whole bunch of speed. This game was not as commercially successful as the previous two. 1999, when this game was released, I guess...
Well, do you remember any commercials for RE3? Because I remember seeing them for RE1 and 2, but I don't remember any advertising for the third game.
Neither do I.
I remember one.
Neither do I. And, when I played Resident Evil 3, it became my favorite of the series for a very long time.
I'm wondering if it didn't do you happen to know whether it did well in Japan? Because if it didn't do well in Japan, I could see them not advertising it because, self-fulfilling prophecy, they don't think it's going to do well, so it's not going to do well.
I don't know. I don't know. I know it was very, very positively reviewed here. I mean, I don't know how well it did in Japan, but I just know that it did very well here. I mean, we love blood, gore, and violence in this country, so it doesn't...
Natural.
It doesn't really surprise me in the slightest. Okay, it came out in 1999, so the PS2 wasn't out yet. So, PS2 wouldn't come out until October 2000, so... It was for this particular game, it would unlock a mini-game that would continue on in later installments. It unlocked the Mercenaries.
Which was incredibly popular.
It was also one of the ways that you could unlock infinite ammo for all weapons.
And who didn't love infinite ammo? Everyone wants infinite ammo rocket launchers.
Oh yeah, I played the entire game on an infinite ammo rocket launcher. Although I always hated the Gatling gun because there was always a warm-up time. My favorite weapons are the Magnum and the rocket launcher, so it was always good. But I can understand why, Resident Evil didn't sell all that well. I mean, by this time, it was starting to get a little bit old, just a little. So then Capcom decided to do, an interesting thing with the series. Let's blow up the main focal point of the entire series to this point. It's like, okay,
Which was actually kind of ballsy in Japan, because at that point, I mean, they nuked Raccoon City, and at that point, you still couldn't even use nuclear weapons in Japanese video games. The ban had just been taken off a couple of years before.
Yeah, and after I played this game and realized, I'm like, I was impressed by the story. I'm thinking they just blew up Raccoon City, and at the end of the game, I'm thinking, now what?
Yeah, well, that's it.
Where the hell is the series going to go from here? The first 3 games were released on PlayStation 1, but now we move on to the next generation of consoles. We move to Resident Evil Code Veronica.
On the Dreamcast.
Yes!
Yay, Dreamcast.
Dreamcast gets such a bad rap, but it was, a very, very decent system.
And Code Veronica, if I recall correctly, is actually the lowest seller of all of the Resident Evil series.
Yeah. Although, when it got ported over for PS2, that helped the sales of the game. But originally, yes, it was released on the Sega Dreamcast in the 2000, PS2 in 2001. This still maintains the basic core gameplay of the series, so still with that sort of eerie sense of total creepiness and shock value. It still maintains the puzzle-solving elements.
They're still zombies.
They're still zombies because Umbrella had to spread itself far and wide to unknown islands and then Antarctica, which is where the series went next. Now that Raccoon City was thoroughly blown to hell. This game, it was notable for, we had a return of Chris Redfield and also Claire, so it was, brother-sister duo here. With the lead being that Claire had gone to Paris in pursuit of her brother, and we found that out because of a document Claire picked up in Resident Evil 2, saying that Chris was going to France to get more of Umbrella. However, she would be captured, taken to a remote island. And as luck would have it, more T-Virus.
The Tyrant Factory, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Why would you make a factory for tyrants? I still ask these questions.
Well, that kind of goes into Resident Evil 2, when one thing I caught that my friends didn't catch for a long time was when they drop, Mr. X into the city, there's 5 other pods there.
Yes, there is.
How many tyrants does Umbrella need?
They were trying to make bioweapons, and so there you are. I remember this game primarily for the antagonist, Alexia Ashford. The first major female antagonist in the series. I mean, Annette Birkin, yes, was in Resident Evil 2, but I consider her a minor character.
Well, then again, we also, we don't even really deal with Alexia for a while in the game. At first, we're dealing with her brother.
Yes, with her schizophrenic brother. So
He's also a cross-dresser.
Yeah. It was an interesting take. I mean, obviously the series had to go somewhere else because their main plot point was blown to hell, and it got a very positive reviews, and it was also very successful in the sales. The other thing I remember about the Dreamcast original was the VMU. The VMU, the memory unit for the Dreamcast, has a little screen on it, and that screen showed your health. That little screen became your little EKG, which showed whether fine, caution, danger, which I thought was really nifty. It meant you didn't have to really go into your inventory to see, how badly you were hurt, although the limping character was also a giveaway.
They've always been good about giving you little cues on how healthy you are.
Except for the very first Resident Evil. The very first Resident Evil, there were no visual cues, so Jill or Chris could be walking around like it was normal, then you check their inventory. Oh shit, they're about to die! I better fix that!
Resident Evil 1 also had a lot of enemies that would knock you to caution or to danger very quickly.
Yes, very difficult game. But Code Veronica then ended up getting remade for the PlayStation 2, and I actually like the PS2 version better. Most of you who know me, I do not buy remakes and re-releases of games if I already have one copy, unless there is things in the remake that are significantly different. Resident Evil Code Veronica for the PS2 had additional cutscenes which plugged up some of the plot holes present in the Dreamcast original, which caused me to buy it. But an interesting game nonetheless. It was although I've made a giant error the first time I played this. I had gone into the game, and as we're getting toward the end, there's a lot of switching off between Claire and Chris. So I thought Claire, as you had already spent the first half of the game with her, I thought she was going to be the one to face the final boss. So I gave her all of the powerful weaponry. And then when I found out that and then when I got to the final boss and realized that it was going to be Chris, all Chris had was a handgun. I'm like, oh, Alexia, handgun.
Show us your skills, Brian. Show us your skills.
There were none. I restarted the game after about 30 attempts. But there were none to be had.
I'm sure there's somebody out there who beat it with a knife.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And they have infinitely less of a life than I do.
The biggest thing I remember from Code Veronica was, spoiler alert, is when Steve ends up dying and becoming a zombie and you have to kill him.
He becomes that, sort of frog-looking, Incredible Hulk-looking thing. And, yes, you do have to kill him. Well, and, it was actually a sad moment. Because,
But then you got his guns.
Yes, you picked up the Lugers and you went on with your married... Well, Claire not so much, because she was reduced to a gibbering, sobbing wreck.
Right.
And Chris had to take over. So, but an interesting take on the series. So then, the fandom decided, okay, Mr. Big Shot, we're waiting for 4. Where we know there's going to be a 4, but we got 0 instead. And that is where we're going to take our break. In our second half, we will continue on with the Resident Evil discussion. It makes the leap to the next generation of consoles with varying degrees of success, and it also redefines the genre again. That is coming up on the second half of this Resident Evil episode. We'll be back.